Um, I wanted to go ahead and introduce myself and welcome you all to the panel today. I wanted to go ahead and go through some agenda items first before we begin the panel format, the webinar panel format for today. For the next maybe 20-30 minutes, we'll see how long the discussion lasts. We're going to be having the panelists introduce themselves and talk about their graduate degree and more general why they decided to pursue a PhD. And then once that discussion, after we go through a couple questions with the panelists, we're going to ask everyone to join the separate Zoom breakout sessions so that you can interact and get to meet the panelists on more of a personal level, and ask them specific questions about their research, their PhD degree, how they got started, and basically their daily life as a UCLA PhD, MD, PhD, or PhD candidate. I would encourage you guys, you do have the Q&A option to ask questions, but please keep those questions to general questions as far as just overall the PhD process and the programs that they are in, or just a general idea of applying to a PhD program. We would like to leave more specific questions to the breakout sessions so that the panelists can speak on a more of a general level during the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I would like to, for the panelists, for each one of you to go ahead and please introduce yourselves. And at the same time, if you can go ahead and basically answer the question of what made you decide to pursue a PhD. And we can start with Joseph, please, if you don't mind. If you guys can please turn on your video and your mics, and we will go ahead and get started.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Joseph. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. I study biochemistry, and I wanted to study it. I wanted to earn a PhD because I like the having creative independence and being able to choose my own research direction in life. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to go down my screen. So if Roy, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Roy McReynolds III. I'm a second-year neuroscience PhD student, and I wanted to get a PhD, I guess, because I've always been interested in science, and I'm also interested in being, I guess, a faculty member at some point in the future. So.
Great, thank you. Anna?
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm an MD PhD student in my third year of my PhD. So that means I finished 2 years of medical school and then started my PhD. So I've been at UCLA for a while. I'm doing my PhD in Dr. Catherine Plath's lab. So we're technically in the Department of Biochemistry, but my work is more on molecular and cell biology, studying how long non-coding RNAs act in stem cells. And one of the reasons I applied to this program is obviously to kind of trace that cliche sounding bench to bedside application of science. So being able to use creative approaches to discover new things and then apply them in clinic pretty much as directly as possible.
Great, thank you very much. Nick?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Nick Vernier. I'm a fourth-year chemistry, inorganic chemist, PhD student. And I kind of wanted to get a PhD because I was really interested in teaching. And I liked research. I liked working on new problems, solving new issues, developing new things.
Great, thank you. Hanane?
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Hanane Hojeji. I'm a second-year PhD student in electrical engineering. And the reason I wanted to get a PhD was actually because I wanted to apply what I've learned as a bachelor student, and I didn't want to stop learning as much as I learned in my undergrad.
Great, thank you very much. All right, I have another question for the panelists. A common question we get as career engagement educators when we work with students who are interested in applying to grad school is, or a PhD in particular, is should I go for a master's first? A lot of students might not be sure if the PhD path is right for them, if they're ready for the amount of years and time. So they ask me, they ask us, should we pursue a master's first and then go back for a PhD? So we wanted to get some advice from you guys as far as is that a path they could take, or would you avoid that path? What are some advice or suggestions you might have for students thinking in that way and approaching a graduate degree? And whomever would like to start with that question.
I can go first. I can chip in a little piece of information here. A lot of people don't realize that most PhD programs are funded, which means that they pay us to get a PhD. We don't pay tuition, and we receive a salary to do the PhD. Whereas a lot of master's degrees are not funded. So if you get a master's, over the course of the 1 or 2 years, you have to pay tuition. And if the finances are a thing that affects your decision whether or not you want to get a master's or a PhD, I think that's one thing to keep in mind. A lot of people don't realize that PhD programs are free and you get paid to do it. I mean, you don't get paid a lot, but you do get a stipend to do that. So I just want to chip that in because it's a common misconception that a lot of people have about PhD programs.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mm-hmm.
Yes, I could follow up on that. I think that's a huge consideration, first of all. And I think that other alternatives to getting a master's are, for example, something that I did after university. I actually spent 2 years as a research fellow at the NIH. And so that got me the kind of experience that told me whether or not I actually want to pursue a PhD, right? I was in a laboratory full time. I was immersed in the science. I was designing experiments and projects. And while that might be a little bit more specific for like a biological or chemistry or physics PhD, I think that is a much more immersive experience that tells you whether or not this is a path for you, if that is your reasoning for considering a master's beforehand. It's also a good opportunity to like beef up your CV and maybe work on some classes you didn't complete during undergrad or retake them for better grades because of the competitive nature of these applications.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I can also continue on that. For the engineering program, actually, a similar thing holds true, that your PhD is actually paid, but as a master's student, you're reliable for the payments and everything. But for the master's program, the good thing it has is that you have the option of doing it online or like actually having the classes on campus. So with both of the versions, you will be able to complete some project-based classes, and you can get like a hang of like what you have learned as a bachelor student, and also like apply it, so then you can see if you can actually excel what you have learned and then apply it in a project setup and come up with your own like project for some of the classes. Or for some of the master options, you can actually work alongside with one of the professors to actually have them as your like a thesis professor. So then they can actually help you out write a thesis. At the same time, you earn some like knowledge about how you need to do research and how you can actually publish.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to?
Yeah, I'll chip in. Another option would be to potentially do a post-bac program, which is essentially like a sponsored 1 or 2, I think most of them are 1-year program after you finish your undergrad, where you'll take some graduate courses. You'll also do full-time research. And a lot of my friends who've done those programs call them like grad school light, or a nice preview to what grad school could potentially be like. And I think that that's always a good option. And most of those, I think, are paid. So that should be good as well.
Great. Anyone else would like to add to that question? Nick?
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing. The master's degree is going to be pretty field specific. So, I mean, in different fields, I mean, I can't speak to the value of it in every field, but say a master's in education is really powerful, right? In chemistry specifically, you know, a master's is really not as valuable as a PhD. And I'd say it's kind of a large disparity. So if you get a master's in chemistry and you just go for your master's, if you want to get your PhD, it's usually going to be another 4 years. You can't just do 2 more. It's quite difficult to do that. So it is going to be a little bit dependent on, you know, exactly your career goals.
Thank you very much. 2 more questions on my end. This particular question is about how competitive, or what made you a competitive candidate. I know in the breakout sessions, students are going to ask you specific questions about that, but overall, as you were applying, as you were going through your undergrad career, what made you feel, what aspects of your application made you feel like you were you became a competitive candidate towards your degree. And we can start again with anyone who'd like to jump in.
I guess I could comment on that. If also anyone's interested in like medical school applications, let me know as an aside. But I think for PhD, the specifics were mostly the strengths of my research. So just research experiences that were directed and kind of how I chose to talk about them and summarize what I've learned in terms of how that would apply further into both my PhD and what I plan on doing with it after. So kind of the longitudinal approach of this is my background and this is how I think I fit and this is why was a big strength both during writing my application and considering the research experiences as well as during interviews.
Nick got a fancy schmancy scholarship to go to graduate school, so that probably made him very competitive.
Wait, did you say I got one?
Yeah, aren't you a Goldwater? Don't you have a Goldwater skill?
Oh, yeah. So I to be honest, I do not think I'm an example of a very strong candidate. So maybe I should talk about that. So I'm a first-gen college student, so everything has kind of been very new to me. And I actually did not figure out that grad school programs were paid until like my senior year of undergraduate. So that was all a very interesting learning experience for me. So it's very exciting to know that I could actually get paid, not a lot, but livable amounts of money to go to graduate school. But yeah, so I started research in my freshman year of undergraduate, which is like really, really early. But I came in, wanting to work for a lab. Obviously as a chemist, that's where we do all of our work. So I wanted to get involved really early. And I won what's called a Goldwater Scholar, which is usually about 300 STEM students nationwide. You can win it as a sophomore or junior, I believe. And it's really, really helpful. It looks nice on applications, like people recognize it. So that's always good. But I'd say anytime you can have input in a research environment is always helpful, because a lot of PhD is, research. It's not really a huge emphasis on classes per se. Again, field dependent. But if you can show how you can be, innovative and contribute, I think really that's what anyone's looking for.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can also second on that. Innovation is important, and the other aspect is leadership. So how much of leadership have you shown if you have been part of any research groups? So for me specifically, I was part of 2 research groups, and I had some scholarships plus leadership roles in both honor societies and project-based clubs on campus. So it's important, any of them, as long as you build up on your experience and then tell the professor or the PI that you're interested to do this specific project because your background kind of builds up on that. That's what makes you competitive in the field.
Great, thank you. Anyone else would like to add? All right. We're going to go through 1-2 other questions because I do want to keep time. Also, we do have some Q&A questions coming up. Just so that students, and I know again more in the breakout sessions, you guys will talk about yourselves and work-life balance, school-life balance, and so on. But just so that the students can get a better sense of who they're going to be meeting with, can you tell us a little bit about your life or your life outside of research and PhD? What are some hobbies? What are you interested in? I did share with the students your bio, so quite a few of you had some of that information in there as well. But if you can kind of expand on that, what do you like to do when you are not in your program or doing research? And anyone would like to join? Answer that? Or we could start with Joseph again at the top of my screen.
Sure, we could start with me. So what do I do outside of the lab is basically what that question was. What's my life like?
What's your life like outside of your lab?
Sure. Admittedly, I do spend a lot of the time in my lab. That's a mixture of I have a lot of work to do and I really like what I do. So I mean, it's not like I'm chained to my desk. In fact, my boss leaves because he has a little kid and he lives in the valley, so he leaves at 3 p.m. to beat traffic so he can get home and play with his daughter. So I mean, there's no one keeping me in lab, but I'm there because I like it and that's what I like to do. But outside of lab, I've been working on a lot of things. And some of it is lab related. I'm trying to teach myself how to code, so I wrote a script in Python over the last couple of weeks. That's been very helpful. And so that's something that I do for fun. And then kind of something non-academic is I'm trying to teach myself how to play the guitar. I make a lot of phone calls with a lot of my friends because, you know, that's what we do nowadays. And I also do a lot of cooking and the dishes and the laundry because that's just what happens when you're an adult, I guess. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Roy?
Before, and yeah, it was like a before this pandemic started and then after, I guess. So before, I would play video games, play basketball, work out, things like that. Me and my friends in my cohort would go to various bars and restaurants and just I liked exploring LA and seeing the city. Now, the video games are still there, so I still do play video games. And like Joseph was saying, talk with my friends via Skype, Zoom, FaceTime, and laundry, dishes, cooking. Tried to make bread. It didn't go so well, but I'll try again.
Great. Anna?
Yeah, I guess a big appeal of choosing to come to UCLA was the fact that it's here and it's in a big city with glorious weather. So a lot of outdoors things like hiking, and I started paddleboarding last summer, which isn't happening anymore. And yeah, I think that you can find whatever hobby really suits you in this town. So I've done a lot of exploring, like with my two cohorts. I've tried rock climbing, I've tried things that I normally would never. But recently it's been much more about just trying to spend time outside in a safe way as much as possible while maintaining my sanity being locked indoors.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, so I mean, just to echo everybody else, really exploring has been a lot of fun. So it turns out one of my best friends is a music producer here from high school, actually. He moved here. And he's an avid kind of rock climber. So he brings me hiking and just like hikes me into the ground all the time. But I also love food. So LA is a nice kind of food capital. So cooking food, trying different things. It's really easy to find kind of obscure ingredients, which is, kind of an advantage. And then, trying all sorts of restaurants and stuff like that for the most part.
Thank you. Hanane?
So for me, like food aside, that's like the big thing. But like personally, I play piano and I enjoy doing that. Like that's my leisure at home. But I love socializing and I love to talk to people and like different events. So like that's why I chose to, and I also like love psychology. So as a part of that, now I'm like the mental wellness coordinator for the Graduate Student Association. So that's why I get to plan out a lot of like different events and hang out with people at the same time, like plan out food that we're gonna have and like different fun events. So that's like all the good things together and like learn about how we can be sane while we are PhD students.
Great, thank you very much. One final question and then we'll get to the Q&A. It's kind of like a final thought question. What was the most important consideration when you were deciding if a PhD was right program for you? Another way to address that is, what were some misconceptions? A lot of times, especially at this point with COVID-19 and students just not sure what's going to happen as far as finding a job or going to grad school, some of them might even be deciding like, I think I'm just going to go for a PhD because it just maybe feels safer than trying to go out into the real world. So what are some maybe misconceptions you had, or final thoughts, or anything that you'd want to advice you would want to give students in trying to even decide if a STEM PhD is the right path for them or not?
I think I can start on that one. The first thing was like, personally, I felt it's really hard to reach out to professors. Maybe they're super busy and like, how am I even supposed to talk to someone with this high rank of like academia, and like, are they gonna even listen to me? They're more than like welcoming and more than happy to talk to any of the students and help them out, like figure out what they want to do. So if you have a passion and you think like you can do something, definitely go talk to professors, and it's actually good. So they don't have a bias that for sure you have to become a PhD student. If you have a certain interest into their lab, you can just go talk to them, or like set up a Zoom meeting with them and then be like, these are the things that I'm interested in. So from your background, probably you have worked outside in the industry before. So what are your thoughts that this industry, how would it go in this like COVID situation? Or like, if I am to join your lab, these are my interests. So do you think that a master is better for me or a PhD? And they're like super honest, and they can actually help you out if this is the right choice for you or not.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I would say, and I'll go, I would just say, talk with your family or any other people who are in your support structure, whether it's a professor, counselors, friends, but you need to talk with people about the situation who are going to be real, who are going to be open, who are going to offer alternative options and various other perspectives that you might not have considered. This is a very difficult time to decide if you do want to, go the PhD route or go to trying to find a job and things like that. But I think that you'll be more, you'll be less anxious about the decision if you've talked with a bunch of people about it, including professors, if you can get in contact with them. So,
thank you. Anyone else?
I'll chime in a little bit. So yeah, to expand off of that, talking to professors is always great. I will say with talking to professors, they tend to have more of the academic side, which is fine. Obviously, that's what they do, right? But I would also recommend something I wish I did more. Just look up any jobs that you might be even tangentially interested in, and just see what the requirements are. Because I do know personally some people have come out of graduate school with PhDs and they're overqualified for a lot of jobs, which is something you don't want to do. But also there are some jobs where you might only need a master's, or you might need the PhD, and that might help you, decide, if there's a career that you're really interested in, or you want to have, more or less options. I think that's a good way to go about it.
Thank you very much.
I would like to second that, because I think it saves you a lot of time and emotional distress down the road. Because if you find yourself in the middle of a PhD, not knowing why you're there anymore, it's a lot more difficult to deal with than having thought all this through and like having a long-term goal, like I want to be in academia and I want to be a PI. Then yeah, you're going to need a PhD. Other applications do need them as well, and I think it's useful training no matter what. But having that long-term understanding of where you want to be in like 10 years, I think is really helpful before starting to consider this path.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to echo what Nick said. I wish I had looked at, what kind of jobs I wanted before I decided to get to a PhD, because there are a lot of good jobs in industry. You can where if you just have a master's, you can do lots of great work. It means you won't be the leader of a particular science group, but it means that you'll still get a really nice cushy job, and with a nice life balance, and you can get a lot of good jobs with just a master's. And so I think it's worth taking a moment to discern what your end goal is, so that you actually know whether or not the PhD is going to be important. And so for someone like me, like I would hate it if somebody told me what to do every day, and I would rather have the creativity and the freedom to study what I want, which is why I think getting a PhD is important for me. But a lot of people are okay with taking a $75,000 or $80,000 job and just making the same drug every day for a couple of years, for the rest of their life, and they're totally okay with that. So I think that just kind of depends on your personality and what you want to do, as well as your financial and career goals.
Thank you very much. We're going to take some time right now to go through the Q&A questions. I'm going to go through some of them and read them, and if it's a matter of maybe one or two of you, or as many of you who'd like to address the questions, that would be great. Off the bat, for our panelists, how much of the reason that you decided to pursue a PhD is because you want to work in industry versus teach in academia? So a lot of students do ask that, what is the likelihood of, going into industry after a PhD, or is it straight path to academia? So if anyone can, chime in on that, that would be great.
I'll chime in. My answer's pretty short. I still don't really know, honestly. I would say I'm aiming for academia, but academia is extremely competitive. The number of jobs, academia, or at least tenure track positions, is relatively low compared to the number of PhDs that are being produced each year. So I personally say always have a backup plan. For me, I'm actually looking into industry or maybe working for the government as my backup plans. But, I knew that getting a PhD would set me up to kind of choose which direction I would go afterwards, should academia not work out. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Anyone else would like to add to that question?
I can add my thoughts like in engineering. So there are several stages, especially because engineering has like a different setup. So for engineering jobs, if you want to work like in the office and like have a boss and like be the type of like you work 9 to 5 p.m. and that's it, then for sure you need the bachelor's, and then maybe some of the companies like Northrop are going to actually sponsor you to do a master's, and like that's how they want you to actually get trained for their setup. So it's better not to continue like pass for PhD. But for the R&D jobs that they actually want you to be more expert, and like it's a higher level job and it's like more paid, and so with more demands, then that's where you're going to need the PhD. But for me personally, like if I want to be in academia or in the industry, especially like given the situation now, everything has become blurred. But what I'm thinking is that I never wanted to have a boss. So it's either like an entrepreneurship or some sort of like a national lab, or like being in academia, but not 100% for academia, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The next question, I'm going to be, again, based on time, just kind of skipping around. Anna, would you like to answer the next two questions that are on the Q&A? If you start your PhD and break up the program after 2 to 3 years, don't they automatically give you a master's degree? And then the next one, compared to only PhD, how much harder is it to get into an MSTP program?
So for the first one, it's kind of a misconception that I had as well when I entered my PhD. It's not really a time frame. It's that your PhD is broken up into two parts, where first you are, God, I forget the term for it, but there's a set of exams that you have to go through in order to kind of advance to candidacy. What was it?
Those are your qualifying exams.
Yes, exactly. So about 2 or 3 years, it kind of depends on your mentor, your progress, your program, a lot of factors. You usually have to go through an oral qualifying exam, which looks different for every field. For me, it was basically giving a 2-hour talk to my selected committee of faculty members who are going to guide me in my thesis through the next, foreseeable future. But the premise was, hey, this is my project. This is what I want to do my PhD on. Do I pass? Like, do you think that this is a big enough scientific effort to make a droplet of difference in the community? And if you pass that oral qualifying exam, then you can master out of a PhD program. So if you decide that the rest of the 3-4 years aren't for you, then you can leave with a master's. And then in terms of admissions to MD PhD programs, they're hard to compare, because I think the point of comparison lies more in terms of medical school admission, which just has a different set of requirements in terms of your clinical experiences, whether or not you can kind of show the admissions committee that you know what you're getting into. But the MD PhD component obviously is supported by your research experience and how you want to integrate the two. But on top of that, are you ready for like an 8 to 9 year commitment in your probably early to mid 20s, I think is one of the biggest obstacles or biggest things that the admissions committee really want to see. Again, it's, do you know what you're getting into? So is it harder to get into? I can't really answer that, because I don't necessarily think so. I think it's just a very different path, and you have to be a slightly different candidate. I hope that helps.
Great, thank you. Anyone would like to add to that? any of those two questions? All right. So we did ask the panelists for their bios, and on their bio it does talk about your undergraduate career, academic career, where you went to school, and so on. But we do have a question where students would like to know, just quickly, if you can expand or share about your undergraduate degree. Did you attend UCLA as an undergrad? And if not, what made you decide to pursue your PhD at UCLA?
Actually, I can go first. I did my undergraduate degree in chemistry, and I have not used it one bit in my entire life, without being rude to all the chemists present, because I started my research basically in molecular biology, and so I ended up in a biochemistry program. So my undergrad experience, I started research very early, and I really liked it, which is why I knew I wanted to go into a PhD program. And so that's kind of how my undergraduate experience shaped my PhD. I didn't attend UCLA, but I picked UCLA for a practical reason. My family is in Southern California, and so that's why I kind of wanted to move back home. But UCLA, I think, is a really great place to do your PhD because it's a very big university. And so once you get into UCLA, you kind of have a wide group of professors and kinds of work that you can be involved in, as opposed to if you were at a smaller school, you might be kind of stuck with just 2 or 3 choices. Whereas here at UCLA, you have a lot of choices, and there's a lot of opportunity for great collaborative work, like Anna said earlier, right? One of the big advantages of having UCLA is they have a medical school, which is very useful in case if you need patient samples or if you want to work with a doctor or something like that. So that's kind of one of my motivations for picking UCLA.
Great, thank you, Joseph. Anyone else would like to talk about quickly their background?
I can chip in. So I did my undergrad here as an electrical engineering student. And during the time, I noticed that I really love to work on the biochemical sensors, variable biochemical sensors. And with that, because my specialty is actually in circuits and embedded systems, through the searches, I found that like the only lab that has the component of biochemical sensors and with the ability to acquire like a very good knowledge of the circuits is just UCLA, because UCLA is like number 4 in circuits in the world. So I just decided to stick with UCLA for my PhD and then continue my studies for the wearable biochemical sensors. So,
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Just very quickly, I was also in the UC system, but up in NorCal, so I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad, and then I did 2 years on the East Coast, and I decided it was time to come back to California. So LA had a lot of the appeals of a big city for me to just enjoy life in for almost a decade, and the medical school deals with a very diverse patient population here, so I would learn a lot. And then the PhD training, I mean, like Joseph said, it's a huge institution, and you can pretty much find anything you want here.
Great,
Yeah, I'll add one more thing in favor of UCLA, as opposed to the East Coast. Southern California is a very relaxed place, which is very helpful because sometimes at some other institutions, they get very uptight or elitist. And also the other thing I'll point out is if you go to school somewhere in like, I don't want to be mean to other parts of the country, but like in Indiana where I did my undergraduate, there's nothing to do in Indiana, which is 90% of the reason why I spent all my time in a lab, because what are you going to do? Go outside and look at the corn? I mean, no, the lab is much more interesting. And so at UCLA, it's really nice because you're not in the middle of nowhere. In the winter, right, it's not -4 degrees outside. So, I'm going to just add that in.
Thank you. So I wanted to continue with the Q&A. I know that during the breakout session, students will be asking you a lot of questions about your research, and then more in particular, how much research did you do as an undergrad for your graduate degree? Is 2 to 3 years enough? Is it how many different labs? The amount of time you probably spend in research in undergrad to get into your graduate degree, into your PhD program. So if you can expand on that, please. And we can start with, can we start with Roy this time?
I would say, so I started research my freshman year in college, but the topic that it was on at the time was nowhere near what I'm doing my PhD in. It was in regenerative medicine, but from a chemistry side. And I just kind of did that because I jumped into whatever research seemed the most cool to me at the time. And then as I took more classes and I realized what I actually was truly interested in, then I ended up switching and joining a lab that focused on neuroscience. And then I did summer programs relating to neuroscience, summer research at different institutions. And I did 2 of those. So I'd say in total, neuroscience research wise, maybe, I guess, 2 years and 2 summer programs worth, but I'd had previous research before that. So.
Great, thank you. Joseph?
Sure. I'll warn everyone, my experience is kind of overkill, so don't take mine as the standard. So in terms of my undergraduate research, I spent 3 years at I started like Roy during the summer of my first year. I was there for about 3 years doing yeast evolutionary biology. But then during my next summer, I did a summer research opportunity at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. So there I did natural products isolations. And then the next year, I went abroad to Singapore. And when I was in Singapore, I found a lab that would take me. And there I did regenerative medicine. I did stem cell biology. And I did that for the entire semester I was there, plus the following summers. I was there for about 8 months. And so, you don't need 3 different lab experiences in 3 different fields in 2 different states and 1 different country to get into the PhD program. But, having a couple of years, at least in 1 field, is a good place to start. Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph. Anna?
So I don't think that there's a magic number of experiences that you need to have or years that you have to have in a lab doing whatever research experience it is you want to be doing. Again, I say this with kind of a similar background to our previous 2 speakers, where my first research experience was summer after my freshman year in college, where I worked on MRSA, an infectious disease lab. And then junior year, I went into a cancer lab. And then I pursued more like biophysics at the NIH, and now I'm doing stem cells. So I think once you for yourself have to establish a common thread, and there's no real prescription for, hey, this is the amount of experience that you need to be considered. I think the way that you treat that experience, what you've learned from it, and how it informs your future making decisions and why you want to do the PhD is definitely the most important part. And if you can do that after a summer that just like changed your life, and you're like, hey, I've been studying art history and now I found science and this is why I want to pursue a PhD, I think you make a convincing applicant as well.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, I'll say for the most part, if you're applying to PhD programs, they're really just looking at whether or not you have kind of an intuition, like if you really want to do research, right? Like, why do you want to do it more so than have you done it a bunch, right? So obviously any research experience is helpful, but I mean, I think Hannah talked about this as well. If you can show that you really want to be someone that, innovates and can create new things, they're really just looking for translatable skills, right? So those research experiences give you translatable skills, whether that's like a technical thing where they don't have to retrain you, or if it's even just, kind of the drive to do research and to want to, develop new things. So the number is not as important as, how valuable that experience was for you.
Thank you. Hanane?
I can talk like from the experience of myself and my students. So partially it's really not the number of the years that you have spent like on any of the technical backgrounds, especially like for engineering, I'm talking about it, because first of all, it's your grades. It's really important so that you actually fit into the above 3.5 threshold. Then second is your ability to think through the project. So if you have done industry, if you have like even worked in a lab for one summer, if you have developed enough experience about how you need to actually think about individual projects and how you can make it better, how you can read the papers, and how you can actually search for the information, that's what's important to show that you can creatively think and you can define the project by yourself. Then after that, it's like how you can collaborate with other people and like what type of publications you have had, then that becomes like another level, which actually makes you stand out a lot better. For me personally, don't take it as the like example, but this is what worked out for me. I was a part of a computer science lab. I was doing machine learning for the asthma protection in wearable body networks. And with that, I got to publish 4 papers before I go to my PhD. So that was a big hit on my resume. Aside, I was a part of my current lab and I was doing research with them. So I got to develop more involved circuitry. So they got like, what is my background? And then it actually helped me out to make a statement that I am a better candidate than other people who are applying. I've had students who have worked with our lab like for 1 or 2 summers or like just 1 year, but just being part of the research and being committed and working there, like from 10 hours to 20 hours, even with 1 year, having their names in a publication helped them get a good like application for Stanford, for UC Berkeley, for UCLA, and all the other good schools. So it really depends what you have taken out of the experience.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the, yes, Joseph, go ahead.
I'll point out, when I entered graduate school, I didn't have any publications, and I think that's very common for a lot of undergraduates too. So at least in my field, if you don't have a publication, that's okay. What's much more important is that you have a good research experience, so that way you're not clueless in the lab, and also that you have a good letter of recommendation from your previous research advisors, so that your incoming PhD program will know that you're not clueless in the lab as well.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Again, I know you guys, the students have such great, wonderful questions. We do have to transition into the individual Zoom meetings. So for those of you whose your questions did not get answered, please feel free to ask your questions. You're more than welcome to jump in from meeting to meeting. I'm going to put up the screen and share the link with you all. So feel free to log out. I wanted to thank the panelists for participating today as part of our webinar. We look forward to, doing more programming with you all in the near future. And if we can ask you all to please join your separate Zoom meetings so that students would be able to ask you more specific questions about your program, that would be great. Thank you again for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.